Hello, and welcome to the Best Boss podcast. I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Britt Berrett. He's a former hospital CEO, a national speaker, and a co author of The Patient Comes Second. Britt is known for turning the traditional healthcare model on its head by actually making a bold claim. If you want to take care of patients, you have to take care of your people first. He has decades of experience with large health systems, and he brings insight, candor, and a lot of heart to every conversation about culture and leadership. Britt, we're so glad you're on the show. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Also on the show is the co-author of our future book, Best Bosses, Dr. Aaron Banowski. So thanks, Aaron, for joining us on the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
So, Britt, talk to me about The Patient Comes Second and like, give me the premise of it.
Well, it's a little bit of a story, so I'll kind of encapsulate it. We moved from San Diego, California. I was working with Sharp Healthcare to Dallas, Texas. Never been to Texas before. Love Texas, great people, but completely out of my element. I was young. I didn't know what I was doing. And I asked myself, why did I get here? Or how did I get here? Why am I here? And where am I taking this organization? I think a leader has to define the summit, has to determine what you're going to become. There are managers who manage, but the leaders lead into the future. So I think best bosses ask the question, what can we become? And that's what I did. And there were a lot of challenges that we had. I actually was the fourth CEO in 4 years at this hospital. I don't know if you've ever gone through that kind of turmoil. And it was what Gallup defined as a toxic work environment. And I knew, having had a healthcare experience myself, it was dependent upon these amazing men and women. And I, for my entire life, have been so grateful for those that saved me. I was in a fire when I was a kid and burnt 20% of my body. I was in a burn unit for a very prolonged period of time. I watched them orchestrate my care. I was so grateful for these caregivers. And I thought that with my business sense and my commitment, that I could create an unbelievable work environment. I just felt like that I owed it to them. And so that's what we did, brought our executive team together, and we started doing some things that were remarkable and different. And we started cataloging it. And actually, I went back to get my PhD because I was studying this topic of strategy and leadership theory. I know it seems a little egghead, but I was fascinated as if you lead and how you does have an impact on your strategic outcomes. The answer is emphatically yes. So I did all this research, wrote a brilliant dissertation, and as Dr. Bujanowski knows, no one reads your dissertation. So of mine, Paul Spiegelman, who had written books in the past, great books on culture, said, let's write a book. And it was initially entitled Leading Change by Changing How You Lead. And our thought was healthcare is really in this time frame, there wasn't a lot of discussion about building teams. There was a lot of discussion about burnout, um, workforce violence, bullying. There was all sorts of conversations, but no one was asking the question, how do you lead effectively? How do you bring the team along and how do you lead differently? So we wrote a book, and at the very last minute, we entitled it Patients Come Second, which I can assure you infuriated many people.
Oh, I can
They
imagine.
were, oh, I can't believe this is what's wrong with healthcare and blah blah. And we're responding. We're time out. We're trying to spur the conversation.
Mhm.
We absolutely believe the patient must come first, but you got to build a team. And some embraced it, thought it was just clever and fun, and we just had a tremendous time talking about this topic. Others are still in their little silos, terrified and frightened and resentful that we would even suggest this premise. But it's been wildly successful. I've got to meet great people such as yourselves who feel the same. So that's
So
the
if patients come second, who comes first?
build the team,
The team.
build, embrace the team.
We've talked before about the best bosses, and both Aaron and I have a background in healthcare. And reading this book, it just nails the point that we use across all industries, that if by prioritizing people, outcomes, and in this case, patient care, quality, safety, etc., those will come if you take care of your people and you prioritize their development and help them achieve their potential. Um, was it met with some Like, tell me about the pushback because all of my healthcare life has been
People,
talked about patience.
some people think it should be Holy Scripture. It's not. It's just a fun
Yeah.
book. It's 10 chapters with silly titles, but it spurs the conversation.
Mm,
And it's important. One of the chapters in the book is no whiners, no losers, no jerks. And oh, you can't say that. Well, yeah, I think you can. Sometimes you have a player on your team who just doesn't fit, and you
mm,
need to, they're the bad apple. And so, what we're suggesting is let's just have the conversation about how you become a best boss. There is no downside in saying to your team, I want to be the best boss you've ever had. What does that mean? You have to be clear. This isn't a family reunion, right? This isn't a club. We have things that we need to accomplish. And to that end, here's the sum of where we're going. But I think we can be a team of effectiveness together.
mm,
So, Britt, maybe a question. It seems so simple to think. You have great leaders, and great leaders get great outcomes. So, focus on the people. Why is it hard? Why don't people do it more often if it's that simple?
Well, obviously, a variety of reasons. I think in the healthcare space, sometimes we get so obsessed with the clinical care and outcome, we just forget
Hmm.
or we dismiss. We don't recognize that it's a team. Now, the old model was the physician's the captain of the ship. The old model was I'm going to give you orders.
mm,
You're going to do what I, those days are gone. It's interdisciplinary. You can be effective cardiovascular surgeon without having an amazing critical care team and an OR that knows what they're doing and cardiac rehab, all pharmacy and diet. In the complexity of today's healthcare, it's imperative that we move in this direction. And it is a new muscle for some. It really is a new muscle for some, Aaron.
Got it.
So, give some advice to the listeners, especially when I think about those in healthcare. How do you, what do you do first?
Well, that's a good question. When I got to Dallas and I was walking through this 600 bed hospital, I asked myself, what can this become?
Mm,
Good can it be? Can it be a top 100 hospital, top 10 hospital? And I asked myself, what's my role and what's my responsibility? Who am I? So I think the first step is figure out who you are. And second step is figure out where you want to take the organization. And then you don't need to be the CEO. You can be a small team. You
sounds
can be
like,
the
where
department.
you want to go, and then how do you do it? You do it through your people, you know?
That's
Yeah. To think of that, people are not human resources. They're not a resource. They're actually the means by which you operate. So how do I, if I'm a senior leader or a CEO or even a manager, what mindset do I need to have going forward? Where's the shifts there?
I think just restating, ask yourself where you're going to take this organization or this team
Okay.
known for. What's going to be your reputation? What are you going to accomplish? And then ask yourself, where do I fit? There are some things I do very well. There are some things you don't want me near a patient to give clinical. I've told the nurses if you see me in a patient room trying to administer clinical care, call the police, tackle me to the ground. But there's amazing nursing care that can be provided that don't want to stand in front of a group of 1,000 employees. Each of us have a gift to give. And once you figure out what your gift is in the sight of achieving this great summit, then you can be effective and you're part of a team. You're part of a
Mm,
team and very, very rewarding.
mm,
So maybe I'll ask you this: is it sounds like as you focus on your people in that leadership environment that you created, you identified where you thought the hospital could go. You talked about yourself, and then you started thinking about your team and the gifts and talents that team had. What advice would you give for leaders who are trying to think about that team and trying to understand what are the gifts and talents of my people and how do I magnify those so we get the best outcomes?
I think there are a lot of tools available, but I think first and foremost, it's a commitment. It's a
mm,
commitment to building the team. Um, for me, I'm a man of faith, and every Sunday I go to church. And in our faith, we have a moment of reflection in our sanctuary, and we take a sacred sacrament. And that's some time for me to kind of go, hey, good week, bad week. How did I do? Can I forgive? Can I be forgiven? And then I plan the week out. And in those, well, I hate to say it, but church for me was a strategic planning session. And I would look, how's Alicia doing? How about Sheila? What about Cole? How about Jared? And I would think about the role that they're playing in the organization. I don't think this is done lightly, Aaron. I don't think this is a kind of sort of sometimes check in. This is, if you're going to lead in healthcare, I believe it requires a divine direction and purpose. And there's plenty of leaders who have tried to lead to for self-aggrandizement. Look at me, I'm parking in the CEO parking space and blah, blah. I think that fails in complexity. But if you have a team and it's interdisciplinary and we work together and we care about one another, yeah, magic happens.
I think of that polarity though, the team and the individual. Like when you're doing your reflection. By the way, was there wondering if you took notes during church? I could see you with a legal pad.
I do have a little back book that I write my thoughts and notes on. That's true.
Oh, you're thinking about how the individuals are, because during my coaching, I often tell leaders that leadership is often an individual game. Who are your direct reports? What do they need? What do they value? What's important to them? Understanding not so much what they say is important, which is they always say patience. If you ask somebody what they care about, the first thing they say is patience, but their actions might show that they care about, different types of outcomes too. And not judging them for that, but understanding that that is the way to motivate somebody, is finding out what they value. Or we discovered that our best bosses really have a knack for thinking about leadership as not only just an individual game, but and a team game. It's both at the same time.
I think Lencioni talks about that 5 dysfunctions, and he talks about trust as the foundation. And a quick story. When I got to Dallas, I sat down with the executive team and I said, where are we going to go? What are we going to become? What are we even known for? And we had a retreat at my house. And there were about 8 of us in the room. We were talking about what we're good at, our strategy, our payer mix, all these things. And at the end of the meeting, it was about a 4 or 5 hour meeting in my home. Everyone kind of trickled off, jumped in the car. The CFO, a woman by the name of Catherine Engstrom, she's hung behind, and she was the CFO, very analytic, brilliant woman, just a friend I cherish. She looked at me and she said, Britt, this is going to be tough. This is good. This is going to be really, really hard. And I said, yeah, it is. You have to care for this team and the organization's success. You're going to have to lead differently than we've led in the past. Are you up for it? And she goes, absolutely. And she became one of the biggest advocates on the clinical side. So when we were looking at resources, the CFO would be so careful on every FTE and every capital dollar. She was asked, what's the investment to bless the patients that we serve and build the team that we're creating? So I think my reason for sharing that story is I think it's tough. I don't think it's easy to build teams to be the best boss. I think it takes tremendous commitment and effort.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I think that it takes commitment and effort to the people, organizations, patients. It's not an or, it's an and. And any other thoughts, Aaron?
One of the things that it struck me, Britt, as you were telling those stories, is that you knew each of your employees very personally. You got to know their strengths, probably their weaknesses as well, because you've got to manage those as well. But in that relationship building with them, it seems like that's where the magic happened, because you were able to understand what their needs were, whether they were at work or not work. There was probably some non-work things that you had to kind of help with as well. What advice would you give to, again, people who are desirous to be a best boss, and they're saying, I think I do that, but I'm not sure if I'm doing it in the right way. What is the difference between the traditional or average boss and the best boss when they're building those relationships? Is it hard? Is it easy? What kinds of things should they be thinking about?
That's a great question because it's self-reflective.
Mm,
John Cotter wrote a book called Leading Change. Some book I'd highly recommend it. This book speaks to how do you take an organization from one state of being to the next, leading change. And one of the parts of it is celebrate successes,
Mhm.
celebrate wins. And I read that chapter, I'm like, yeah, no, we have an annual budget. If we make our budget, we're good. If we miss our budget, we're bad. And really, in further reflection, we need to celebrate our successes along the way. So I would say to future bosses, are you celebrating successes that are in alignment with that summit? A quick story. When I turned 40, my wife threw me a big party and I loved it. She got me a cowboy hat. My sisters all flew in. It was a fantastic party. And so 6 months later, Lori's turning 40. So I called my sisters and I said, hey, we're going to throw a party for my wife. She's turning 40. I got a mariachi band. I got a dance floor. I got, trumpets. I got the whole thing. And as only a sister can do, she says, Britt, are you an idiot? What? You're going to throw a big party for your wife? I go, yeah, and I'm going to have a speaker and I'm going to, be a slideshow. She goes, your wife would hate that. That's
mm,
not how she likes to be celebrated or recognized or thanked. I'm thinking, that's true. She doesn't like that. And so I canceled the band and the dance, and we flew to St. Martin's and spent a week on the beach, just the two of us. And she couldn't have been more thrilled, one of her favorite vacations.
mm.
And I share that story is you have to understand the audience. Have to understand the team. You got to figure out where they're coming from. What are the stories and experiences that brought them to the place that they are today? And what will be inspiring for them to move into the future? Paint a picture. So I think that's an important role that a leader must have to understand the team, how they like to be recognized, how they like to be corrected, what's most effective, how do they measure success. The other tool, before I would hire an executive, I would travel to where they were working. I've
Oh,
traveled all over. So before I hired a CFO or a CNO or a COO, I would travel to where they were working and walk around with them. I remember I went to Nashville and my CFO, Tim Burrows, I met him there and we walked through his hospital. I saw how he interacted. I saw his work environment, the things that he put on his wall. I think all of those things are tools for aspiring leaders to consider. And the last thought I'd have, I know I'm taking too long. I think we're entitled to divine direction. I believe that we're entitled to inspiration.
mm.
Time and time again, I think about, this mission of the organization and how do we bless the lives of the people we serve. I think there's an influence, and I've felt promptings in my life to say, yeah, you need to do this, or yeah, back off. And it has been a cherished experience as a boss.
Yeah, it's also
You know,
interesting that the people that you serve are also the employees.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Question about it.
Mm,
well, it's interesting. When you were talking, Brett, the picture was clear in my mind that you have to meet people where they're at, but also have a vision of where they can be. And
Yeah.
your job as the best boss is to bridge that gap, which is it's not a negative thing. It's actually a positive thing. It's like I see so much potential in you, but if you don't baseline where they're at, understand that, you'll head off on the wrong place and maybe not get them where they could be.
It's like exercise. I know, Aaron, you're an exerciser, and there's a point where you've gone too far, bridged too far, and pushing team members. But
Mhm.
there's a sweet spot when you push them just a little bit, and they gain a little more confidence, and they do something exciting, and you celebrate that success, and it affirms that they can do more and become more. Remember when electronic medical records came in, and
mm,
we were, our brains were exploding? Imagine the integration of artificial intelligence and ambient generative. I think that's an example of new technologies and new opportunities and thinking differently that
Right.
great leaders and great organizations will not flee from, but they'll embrace and ask, well, what's the application? That's where you push them just a little bit further than where they've been before and then find the success.
I'm
Well,
giving a
one of the
lecture next week on to physicians about AI, and it always starts with it's fire. Is fire good or is fire bad?
It's so true.
Well, It can be both.
Well, the
So,
other thing that strikes me, Britt, is that, and I have to say to the audience, is that I know Britt. He and I worked together. I was the strategy executive, and he was the executive at the hospital, leading the hospital. One of the things that strikes me about, and just knowing you as a person who really aspired to be a best boss, is that best bosses aren't always easy, but
mm-mm.
they're always valuable to you. I'm sure your employees would say, yeah, Britt was hard to work for, but I always felt great doing it because we achieved things together. And so it's not about necessarily coddling or being easy on people, but it's celebrating, it's having success as you enable that individual, that human being, to do everything that person can and should do as an employee of the company.
And mistakes along the way. I mean, I think about the best bosses I've ever worked for, right? I think about who they are and what they gave to me. They pushed me. They got me a little uncomfortable. And
What's your best boss?
what's that?
Can you tell a story about your best boss you ever had?
Yeah, I was an assistant administrator in Montclair, California, and his name's Pete Bastone. And Pete was the CEO, young, big Princeton football player, and he pushed me hard. And I was young, didn't quite know, in those days I was, I couldn't figure out what Medicare and Medicaid was, the beginning of your career. And he pushed me hard, had high expectations for me, but also celebrated my success. I remember at Christmas, he gave me a small gift that was very personal and meant the world to me because he knew me and what I would cherish. And I still have that gift here. I think best bosses push you a little hard, but they understand who you are and they celebrate your successes. And Pete's since retired, and I hope he hears this because I probably haven't told him how much I've been grateful for that best boss experience.
A great point to reach out back to your best bosses and just tell them how impactful they were for you. Well, Britt, I can't thank you enough for joining us um, and really talking about your experience. It mirrors so much of what we're trying to do with both within healthcare and actually without healthcare to really put a highlight on employees and how the outcomes are just really come from them. And thank you so much for joining us. And this has been the Best Boss Podcast.